Now I request Dr. Suganya to make a presentation.
Thank you, sir, for this introduction. Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarvagurubhyo Namaha. So, Namaskaram, everyone. I'm very happy to be giving this talk today. And I thank Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundations for organizing this webinar during these hard times, and also for inviting me to give this talk on this most auspicious Guru Purnima day. So without further ado, I think we can start my presentation. So this talk is about Kulasekhara Āḻvār's portrayal of Kṛṣṇa. Now, among all the Āڵvārs, the Āڵvārs are, you all know, but just a quick reminder, they are Tamil Vaishnava saint poets who lived somewhere between the 6th and 9th centuries in the Tamil land. And Kulasekhara Āڵvār, among all of them, is traditionally known as a Rama Bhakta because his Perumal Tirumuri is composed, as Sir just mentioned, of 105 verses divided into 10 pattas or decades, and 3 whole pattas are dedicated to Rama. That's roughly 30% of his work. Next slide, please, which you can see on the next slide. So there are 3 for Rama and 2 for Kṛṣṇa, and it is in gray here. So this is something that distinguishes him from the other Āڵvārs, especially his contemporaries like Periyarvar or Andal, who had an absolute preference for Kṛṣṇa. And the modern Sri Vaishnava teachers often say that the Āڵvārs were Kṛṣṇa Bhaktas, while the Acharyas were Rama Bhaktas. There's even an anecdote involving Parashara Bhatta, an eminent, great Sri Vaishnava Acharya who lived probably in the 13th, 14th century, and a great Rama Bhakta. And once he was asked by a mischievous person to speak about Kṛṣṇa. So he spoke the whole time about Rama, and his last sentence was, well, Kṛṣṇa was an incarnation that came after such a great Rama. Well, I was pretty tempted to do the same thing, but no worries, I won't do that. Because after all, Kulasekhara Āڵvār did dedicate 2 pattas to Kṛṣṇa. So I'm going to speak about these 2 decades. So these 2 pattas give 2 different portrayals of Kṛṣṇa. These twin portrayals are as radically different as possible. In Perumal Tirumuri 6, I'm going to just say PTM, it's faster that way. So in PTM 6, the Āڵvār turns into a lovelorn but betrayed gopi. And this gopi, we can even call her Kulasekhara Nayaki, because in the Sri Vaishnava tradition, we refer to Nammarva when he borrows the voice of a woman who falls in love with Kṛṣṇa as Parankusha Nayaki, and in a similar situation, Tirumangayarvar is known as Parakala Nayaki. Okay, less common is calling Kulasekhara Āڵvār in love with Kṛṣṇa as Kulasekhara Nayaki, but still, I think it will serve the purpose here. So in PTM 6, Kulasekhara Nayaki heaps accusations on him, thus producing an enchanting Nindastuti, mixing the Raudra Rasa and the Sringara Rasa, etc. And many more rasas. I can't cover them all here, unfortunately. As for a PTM 7, that's the next decade, there's a radical change. The Āڵvār turns veritably into Devaki, who deplores at having been unable to bring Kṛṣṇa up as a child. Here, it is the Vatsalya kind of love that pervades for Kṛṣṇa. So the focus of the paper will be as much on Kṛṣṇa here as on Kulasekhara's female voices, those of Kulasekhara Nayaki and Devaki, through whom his portrayals are drawn, so that the portrayals are very subjective. And I will also try to answer questions like, how is Kṛṣṇa portrayed? Why is he portrayed the way he is? How did Kulasekhara draw this portrait? And what influenced him? Now, we must keep in mind that this portrayal of Kṛṣṇa must have been the product of many literary interactions, because no man is an island and no poet is an island ever. So Kulasekhara Āڵvār was also a very scholarly man who knew his Sanskrit epics, his Sanskrit Puranas, other kavyas, but possibly also Prakrit poetry, Pali writings, Jain and Buddhist writings, but especially the Tamil classical literature known as the Sangam literature, upon which we shall focus here, because everything has influenced his poetry, but unfortunately we won't have the time to have a look at everything. So I will just say 2 words on Sangam poetry. This is known as the classical poetry of Tamil, and this was probably compiled during the first few centuries of the Common Era, let's say 1st to 4th century of the Common Era. The poems were probably older than that. And it's highly codified. The codification probably came later. And the Sangam poetry is roughly of two types, Aham and Puram. And Aham means interior, and it contains poems that deal with the inside, meaning the matters of the heart, mostly of love, betrayal, patient waiting for the beloved, etc. And Puram means exterior. It deals with everything else, basically. So it could be war, heroic values, generosity of the king, and so forth. As we cannot deal with everything here, not even Puram, I'm just going to focus on Aham poetry, how Aham poetry may have influenced Kulasekhara in producing his Kṛṣṇa and also the other characters. I will, of course, mention a few other Sanskrit and Prakrit works whenever possible. Unfortunately, because we don't have much time, I won't be quoting and reading out everything, but I have given important sources and quotations in my write-up, which at some point you may get to read. So let's move immediately to Kulasekhara Nayaki's Kṛṣṇa, who, let's see if he's actually the Aham hero. Next slide, please. So a couple of words on Aham poetry, because I'm sure everybody knows about it, but just in case someone doesn't, I think it's very good to just introduce this very quickly. This is going to be very broad, so I apologize for any inaccuracies, but what to do? So in Aham poetry, poems are classified into 5 landscapes. So like mountain or seashore, pasture land, etc. There are 5 of them, and each location corresponds to a different phase of love. It could be the first love, the first meeting, separation, etc. Next slide, please. And each landscape has a set of emotions linked with it, and it has its own deity, fauna, flora, etc. I'm sorry for the quality of this slide, but there you go. If you see, the columns represent the different landscapes, and the rows represent the different elements that are linked to those landscapes. So if you look at Mullai, for example, the third column, you can see that Mullai corresponds to pasture land, forest, and it corresponds to the rainy season. It corresponds to the emotion that is waiting in patience, patiently waiting, I mean. And there are a few animals linked to it. And perhaps more importantly, right at the bottom, I have marked it. The deity of Mullai is Mayon, whom Professor Panneerselvam mentioned, identified with Kṛṣṇa. He's the deity of the forest. So Aham poetry, next slide, please. We can see these elements can be found in the Perumal Tirumuri, and especially in PTM 6. On the right, you can see the Perumal Tirumuri elements, like rain, cowherdesses, etc. And on the left, I have put the landscape to which these correspond. For example, let's just look at the first row. PTM 6 mentions the rain, the cowherdesses, Kṛṣṇa, meaning Mayon, and the jasmine flower. So these all correspond to the Mullai landscape. It's the forest, it's the pasture land, and it corresponds to the season of for patient waiting, and so on and so forth. So we know that Aham elements are everywhere in this decade. So let us see if Kulasekhara Āḻvār's portrayal of Kṛṣṇa also corresponds to the Aham hero, and if his heroine, Kulasekhara Nayaki here, corresponds to the Aham heroine. Okay, so does he follow the Aham conventions, or does he follow them but also innovate, especially when it comes to portrayal? Next slide, please. So the next one is the first verse of PTM 6.1. Let me read the Tamil only for this, because we won't have the time to read all in Tamil. Ermalar Pungurel Ayar Madar Yenai Palarulla Ivuril Undan Marvu Tarvudarku Asainmai Arindarinde Undan Poyai Ketu Kurmare Pol Panikudal Yedi Kusi Nadungi Yamunayachil Varmanal Kundril Pularanindren Vasudeva Undan Varavu Parte. Let me read the translation. Knowing of my own absence of desire for embracing your chest, in this town where there are so many cowherd women with curling hair adorned with beautiful blooming flowers, despite knowing it, listening to your lie, I stood as it dawned on the long sandbank on the river Yamuna, feeling the coolness of the abundant rain like dew, getting shy, shivering, O Vasudeva, expecting your arrival. So this girl, Kulasekhara Nayaki, mentions, first of all, the physical comfort. She's feeling cold. It's been not raining, but the dew is quite as much as the rains. She's shivering. All these are consequences of Kṛṣṇa's behavior. And this physical trouble at this point seems to prevail over the emotions, with perhaps just embarrassment being mentioned here outright, but also we clearly get the hint of anger. She says, "Your lie." Now, what about Kṛṣṇa? Well, he is addressed directly, but this first introduction is not very flattering. His philandering activities are alluded to, at least his not being very loyal to this woman, his missing a rendezvous and causing so much trouble to this girl opened this decade. Now, please note that the name Vasudeva is used to address Kṛṣṇa. If Kulasekhara Āḻvār had turned into a gopi, then we know she's not supposed to know that Kṛṣṇa is Vasudeva's son at this point. But probably this term was used by Kulasekhara Āḻvār to show that Kṛṣṇa does not have the qualities of loyalty that Vasudeva had. One would have trusted Kṛṣṇa to be as honorable as his father, but he's not. Anyway, let's see how the Pattu progresses. Next slide, please. Let me read the translation. Giving a side glance to one woman with long dark tresses bedecked with flowers, thinking of a woman, then placing your heart on her, speaking to another woman, intending lies for one simple-minded woman, embracing one woman with curly locks, you are not true to her either. Or you who snapped asunder the Arjuna trees, your deceit does grow along with your growth. Now here Kulasekhara Nayaki lists all of Kṛṣṇa's philandering activities, all the girls he's been hanging out with. And the impression of him that we get does not seem to improve. He's not true to any of them, and he gets worse with passing time, if we are to believe her. He broke the trees and probably also the hearts of these girls, including that of Kulasekhara Nayaki. And her mood worsens progressively. Next slide, please. She says at some point, okay, why did you come here leaving her behind? You go back there again, O Lord. And then at some other point she says, what for have you come by my side now? Our Lord, be gracious enough to leave. And then it gets worse. She says, I shall settle my score if you come here one day inside my place. Now, Kulasekhara Nayaki thus refuses to allow him back and threatens him with reprisal when the time comes. And this refusal is akin to a verbal form of door shutting or vayal maruttal of the Marudam practice in Aham poetry. Now, her anger is clearly palpable, but she does not seem to be excessively pining, or she's not becoming pale or emaciated due to viraha, separation. However, despite her anger, she also seems to bear great love for Kṛṣṇa, for she sends him a messenger. Next slide, please. And then here, so while there was nectar in the breast milk of the mother, meaning Yashoda, crawling and walking with a tottering gait, you went and placed your mouth at the devil's breast, meaning Putana's breast, sucked the poison and stood for the others to rail at you, calling you a fool. While I'm here with great choice love, you well enjoyed great pleasure with the female messenger who came to you as I had sent her. Does that not befit your wickedness? Well, this is, okay, we can feel the anger here. He cheated her with her own messenger. Now, this is very interesting because in Aham traditions, there are messengers, but usually they are very reliable. But this girl hasn't proven to be very reliable. She sounds almost non-Tamil. She's more like the Swayamduti, in the Sanskrit and Prakrit literatures who tend to be sometimes scheming because they try to get the man themselves. But okay, there's a difference also here in that, okay, can you hear me? Because apparently I have a network issue. Okay, in that she seems to be a naive partner, a naive victim.
Audible, Dr. Suganya.
Okay, audible. Good. Okay, thank you. So she seems to be a naive and innocent victim also of Kṛṣṇa. But then here, Kṛṣṇa is accused not just of cheating, but also of having bad judgment and a bad taste. Here is this wonderful Kulasekhara Nayaki, and what does he do? He goes and hangs out with her messenger. So, next slide, please. Elsewhere, so here we can see there's a hint of jealousy. She's probably also a bit disgusted with his activity, but the love is clearly there. The next poem, let's see. the love is unmissable, although it is not outwardly expressed. Wearing a feather from the peacock tail, putting on a bright soft garment around the waist, placing flower bunches so that they are attached to the ears, as the auspicious, beautiful forest garland shown on your chest. You came sweetly blowing the flute with the women with curly hair that smells of honey, embracing them. As you come blowing the flute one day, it is us that the music of your flute will not reach. Now we can feel the reproach here and a hint of longing, as well as a bit of sadness at his wayward behavior and his neglecting of her. And all these are signs of love. And despite the negative emotions that she feels, Kṛṣṇa Nayaki's description of his physical beauty betrays her attraction and her love for him. And this combination of love and anger produces this exquisite nindastuti, or blame praise, which has an important place in Indian literature. Now, next slide, please. Let us quickly compare these verses with a few Aham poems in order to see how the Talevan, meaning the hero, and the Talevi, the heroine, are portrayed there, and to see how much or how little Kulasekhara Āḻvār was inspired by this poetry. This is Kuruntoke 30. I'll just read the translation by Ramanujan, A.K. Ramanujan. My lover, capable of terrible lies, at night lay close to me in a dream that lied like truth. I woke up still deceived and caressed the bed, thinking it my lover. It's terrible. I grow lean in loneliness, like a water lily gnawed by a beetle. So the Talevi here pines for the absent lover. She feels deceived and she grows lean with Viraha. She has been used by him, as the flower bee metaphor shows. But we do not have such elements in PTM 6, but the lover Kṛṣṇa seems to have common traits with this hero in this poem. He is absent and probably abandoned her and gave a miss to a rendezvous with the lady. Next slide, please. And this is an even shorter poem from the Kuruntohai. So again, it's the heroine who's speaking. I am here. My virtue lies in grief in the grove near the sea. My lover is back in his hometown, and our secret is with the gossips in public places. Here, the heroine, who's already badly suffering from abandonment, states that her affair with her lover has become public knowledge, which is very similar to the first poem that we read, in which Kṛṣṇa Nayaki insinuates that her waiting for him for many hours, even in a lonely place, or perhaps especially since it is a lonely place, may have been noticed by the people, for she claims to be shy. Now, but does she turn into a weak female who fades away at being abandoned? Not quite. Instead of crying like a more common abandoned, jilted girl that we have just read about, Kṛṣṇa Nayaki asks Kṛṣṇa not to return and even vows revenge if he does come back, as we saw earlier. Well, it must be pointed out that some Aham heroines also are feisty, but most of them are not. We can thus see that Kṛṣṇa does seem like the Aham hero, although Kṛṣṇa Nayaki is feistier than an average Aham heroine. And although next slide, please. And although it is beyond the scope of this paper to deal with this, it is worth mentioning that these two characters are not just like characters out of the Aham poetry, but also very much like the lovers found among many, many works, the Saptasai, the love poems in Prakrit, which were probably composed around the same time as the Aham poems, roughly during the first few centuries of the Common Era. Next slide, please. It is also possible to compare Kṛṣṇa Nayaki's portrayal of Kṛṣṇa with that of Nammarvas or Tirumangais or even Andals. In the next slide, I have given this table. Unfortunately, we won't have the time to look at them. Here, if you look at on the left side, we can see that Andal too accuses Kṛṣṇa of telling lies, of being cruel, of being wicked, of being terrible with women, etc. But perhaps although she abuses him to a certain extent, the main difference between Andal and Kṛṣṇa Āḻvār perhaps lies in the spirits of the personas in their works. Because Andal sounds, if you read her poems, more sad, helpless, maybe submissive even, and begging. And she even discloses her inability to be angry with him for too long and expresses her love for him explicitly. She's more like the Aham heroine. In contrast, the rebellious Kṛṣṇa Nayaki seethes with anger, indignation, and possibly even jealousy. So we could say that Kulasekharan seems to have used part of the Sangam settings and adopted some practices belonging to non-Tamil literature as well to produce a refreshingly innovative patta with very lively characters. So we also see that Kṛṣṇa was a human, a mischievous boy. There is no reference to his divinity here. Now, things are going to be very different in the next part that we're going to deal with. There's going to be a radical U-turn, as we are going to see how Devaki's Kṛṣṇa appears in Kulasekhara Āḻvār's Perumal Tirumuri. We can see that all the love for Kṛṣṇa that is bottled up by Kulasekhara Nayaki is thoroughly expressed by Devaki in Perumal Tirumuri 7, except that instead of the kind of passion that a woman feels for her lover, we find parental love attachment. But still, some people would say that even this love, that is, the way it is expressed, is very close to being perceived as sensuous love. So let us see, how is Kṛṣṇa portrayed in this patta? How about Devaki? And where did Kulasekharan draw his inspiration from to invoke such love? Is it possible to have the slide, sir? Okay. PTM 7 is a lament, as I mentioned earlier on, or maybe I didn't. And lament in literature is pan-Indian. I should say it's universal rather than just pan-Indian. And it has existed of old. It's there in somehow there in Puram poetry as well, but also in Aham. But this one is particularly different because Devaki is not grieving because she had to part from someone she loves when she is speaking, at the time she is speaking, because she is talking to a youthful Kṛṣṇa who seems to be with her right there and then, but because she missed her childhood. So in this slide, we have PTM 7.4. Let me read the translation. O Kṛṣṇa, the breath of me, a sinner, who am now drinking with my own eyes the joys of your youth, which shines with a face like the beautiful full moon, with delightful moonlight, strong shoulders, chest, and strong arms, that crescent moon-like forehead underneath, that the black curly hair with blooming flowers, large lotus eyes, but who have lost the endless joy of your childhood, which knows nothing but that she is my mother, shall not remain. So this loss and sadness are killing Devaki. And she begins with a description of the present youthful Kṛṣṇa, which even the lovelorn Kulasekhara Nayaki does not quite do the same way, at least. And yet Devaki is not interested in this beauty because it does not satisfy the heart of a mother, as she longs to see him as a child. Next slide, please. Here she mentions what Yashoda saw. So Yashoda, who saw these, your tender little budding lotus-like hands that take hold of and eat the butter, having wholly mixed it up, the state of fear at her striking you with the beautiful cord, your red mouth filled with white curds, your crying, that glance given fearing her, your twisting, your beautiful small red lips, and your worshipping gesture, saw the bounds of great happiness. So Yashoda saw the bounds of great happiness by seeing all these. So here we have an imaginary description of Kṛṣṇa as a child that arises in Devaki's mind, Devaki's longing mind, something that she would have liked to see but hasn't been able to. So her disconsolate word, which expressed her despair, having missed the whole experiences, almost suggests a tinge of jealousy at Yashoda for getting such a good fortune and pleasure. Kulasekharan's Devaki is quite unlike a mother who appears in Aham literature, because in Aham literature, the mother laments for her young daughter who has eloped with a man because she's worried that she might be enduring great physical suffering. Here it is a lament that is concerning her own loss. Besides, this Devaki, Kulasekhara's Devaki, comes across more as a devotee rather than just as a common mother, as she does not even mention once the loss of her infants or that she could not bring them up. It is all about missing Kṛṣṇa's childhood experience. And this is in contrast, next slide please, with, for example, the Jain work Antagada Dasao, as indicated by Freedom Hardy in his masterpiece, the Viraha Bhakti, published in 1983. This work also has, meaning the Antagada Dasao, the Jain work, also has Devaki mourn for her loss of children to Kṛṣṇa, but without the focus solely being on Kṛṣṇa, despite the fact that there are very striking similarities with PTM 7. This Devaki sounds a bit more like the one who is mentioned in Harivamsha, But in Harivamsha, it is Akrura who speaks to Krishna about Devaki's sufferings. Devaki does not have a voice of her own there. I'll quickly finish in a couple of minutes. In the following verse, next slide, please, which lists some of Krishna's exploits, which are infinitely more positive than the ones listed by Kulasekhara Āḻvār. Devaki seems to know about her son's divine nature, which is probably quite different from PTM 6 or the Antagada Dasau. I, a servant, did not get to see anything being there in such a way that my heart feels refreshed inside. None of the children's good games endowed with victory, starting from you're spreading an umbrella with the hill, you're performing the beautiful Kuravai dance and the dance with water pots, you're smashing the wood apple tree with a calf, and you're treading on Kalia's head with the feet. If there's a mean for me, a servant, to see all that, do bestow it upon me. So realizing his divine nature, she makes one final big request, and that is to allow her to see his childhood, his past exploits. Now, how he will do that, we don't quite know. Maybe take her back to the past or reenact them, whichever way, or give her another birth. Now, to conclude, we can say that we have two different portrayals of Krishna. One of them was purely human, with many different rasas, and the second one, okay, it's also Krishna as a human, as a baby, but it also has elements of the supernatural, where Devaki knows, as Kulasekhara does, that he is God. There is no way we can know if the Āḻvār had first-hand knowledge of all the literary works that I mentioned and many others that I could not mention, but he does seem to know about them. So we do see that his portrayal of Krishna and the characters who surround him are the product of a fruitful mixture of sources, Tamil, Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, and so on. And this is what makes Kulasekhara Āḻvār's poetry, but also the other Āḻvār's poetry, so rich and so influential, as it set an example for composing poetry and narrating the lives and acts of Narayana and his incarnations. And among those who benefited greatly, we can name Kamban, for example, who wrote the Tamil Ramayana, but also Bharatiyar, as Professor Panneerselvam mentioned. And in the process, Kulasekharan and the Āḻvārs have also added layers and layers to Krishna's character, added accounts of his exploits not found in the epics or the Puranas, made him a character with many shades, and contributed to an enriching of his portrayal at a pan-Indian level. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Sukanya, for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, sir.
It was really very good. We only wish we had more time and